Hello, everyone. Today's video is more of a rant than anything, and my extreme displeasure with what is almost now law, which is Bill C-11. It's actually in its second, actually, it has already passed its second reading in Senate, and it's on its way to the final committee on, I believe, November the 18th. I think it is important that everyone is aware of what this bill really means. Bill C-11 will ultimately hurt Canadians and Canadian content creators, as well as independent media and your average social media user. To summarize what this is, for those of you out of the loop, Bill C-11, an act to enact the Consumer Privacy Protection Act and the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act, and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. The Consumer Privacy Protection Act would be enacted to maintain, modernize, and extend existing rules and to impose new rules on private sector organizations for the protection of personal information. All right. So this bill had come about in 2020 and was actually labeled as Bill C-10. It was defeated in Parliament here in Canada back then already, but the Trudeau government had reintroduced it back in 2021, and it's been ongoing ever since. So what is this act that I'm so disappointed with? Well, to summarize, this act is going to change many things for the way we consume content, but also for content creators, for news organizations as well. So this means platforms like YouTube, Twitter, Netflix, Amazon, TikTok, and all other social media platforms that have a foothold here in Canada, they will now be required to serve Canadian content first above all other content. This will also affect podcasts, radio streaming, and music services as well. It is also well known in the creator community that most of their reach and their views or listens come from foreign countries, not necessarily Canada. So this is going to hurt content creators here in Canada because most of the views are coming from other countries. So if we're being served Canadian views first, we may not be getting the information that we'd like or even need in some circumstances. It also gives the CRTC the ability to regulate, promote, or demote social media content produced by or viewed by Canadians at their discretion. Basically, the CRTC will have at their discretion to promote or demote anything they see fit. Now, I can see this being abused by the various political parties, namely the Liberal Party, to start. This also funnels more money to mainstream media, who have already taken multi-billion-dollar bailouts in the last 10 years, who are struggling financially. Smaller media companies, such as myself, might be required to register as a broadcaster, or the content we produce might fall under the term online undertaking, which is the terminology used in Bill C-11. Content creators such as, let's say, Linus Tech Tips, they'll be forced to abide by these new laws or move their operation elsewhere if they want to avoid them. And I find it a bit surprising, actually, that they haven't said more about this in their podcast or their online YouTube channel as well. So I think a lot of creators maybe aren't quite aware with how this is going to really affect them. This also means more regulation, more oversight, increased costs to implement these changes, and this will probably also increase your cable bill. If you're still on cable, all your streaming services will probably go up in price, etc., etc. And where all these extra costs, they're obviously going to get passed down to the consumer, me and you, and anyone else that lives in Canada, obviously. The content also distributed on these platforms will always, well, they'll become under the thumb of the CRTC, essentially. And the CRTC is the Canadian regulatory body here in Canada and we've had them for many decades already, and they've already had their fingers in the pie, so to speak, on what Canadians can watch on regular TV. The content distributed on these platforms, if you decide to try to skirt the rules, they can come after you. And the penalty, according to Bill C-11, is a $25,000 fine per day, up to a $25,000 fine per day. Now, this probably won't apply to smaller creators. They probably won't go that high. But for the tech giants, their incentive now to want to push Canadian content, they're either probably going to pack up and leave the country, or they'll simply abide by the rules, and then costs will go up and you'll get more ads on your videos, at least here in Canada anyways. That's my take on it anyways. It will also affect online privacy and news agencies, independent news agencies, whistleblowers. So if they're reporting on corruption, something that the CRTC or the government in power doesn't like, they can, kind of go in behind the scenes and say, hey, this isn't quite enough Canadian content. Let's push them down in the search results or in the algorithm. And it'll also most likely require that agencies, news agencies, smaller news agencies that are independent will probably have to register as a broadcaster at that point, which makes things even stickier. If you have to register as a broadcaster and new regulations start to apply to you that didn't apply to you before, so again, costs are going to go up. There's going to be more red tape, and a lot of what you know from independent media now is probably going to be too hard to do and disappear, unfortunately. Okay, so I wanted to actually also highlight some of the following sections of the bill that I think are important, because I think the big news outlets such as CTV and Global and whatnot, they're all gung-ho about this because it means they're probably going to get a lot more money to prop up their failing business model. But I am going to bring up here the chart, the Bill C-11, okay? All right, I have the act brought up here. Now, the sections I was most concerned with was actually under summary, under A for online undertaking. So it says here, add online undertakings. Undertakings for the transmission or retransmission of programs over the internet as a distinct class of broadcasting undertakes. Now, I know that they say, oh, this is not going to affect typical people from uploading to TikTok or YouTube and da. But when you start looking into Bill C-11 here, if you go down to section 4.2, sorry for jumping around here. For section 4.2, it says, for the purposes of paragraph 4.1(2)(b), the Commission may make regulations prescribing programs in respect of which this act applies. So what it's essentially saying here is that even though they have said it's not going to affect them, they can still come back and make decisions on their own. And I'm assuming this would be the CRTC making this decision. So if you have a large YouTuber, it doesn't matter who, they may fall under this regulation. All right, so under Broadcasting Act, we have broadcasting means any transmission of programs, whether or not encrypted by radio waves or other means of telecommunication for reception by the public by means of broadcasting receiving apparatus, but does not include any such transmission of programs that is made solely for performance or display in the public space. Okay, it also has about the undertakings here. If you wanted to read through it yourself, you could. I'm just kind of highlighting it. Under exclusion, it says here, a person who uses a social media service to upload programs for transmission over the internet and reception by other users of the service, and who is not the provider of the service, or the provider's affiliate, or the agent or mandatory of either of them, does not, by the fact of that use, carry on a broadcasting undertaking for the purposes of the Act. Now, I know what you're thinking, that, hey, this doesn't apply to me, but it could still apply to you, because they can still make those decisions if they want to kind of override this section and say, oh, you are under the Broadcasting Act because of some other points. Oh, you're putting it out there. Maybe it's going on to a network, TV network occasionally. Or maybe you're just making a lot of money and they want to tax you and regulate. And then it says social media service and programming control. An online undertaking that provides a social media service does not, for the purposes of this act, exercise programming control over programs uploaded by a user of the service who is not the provider of the service or the provider's affiliate or the agent or mandatory of either of them. So it kind of sounds like it's good that they're trying to do this, but again, they could override this. And for myself personally, I provide hosting service, so I don't necessarily provide video hosting services, but I do provide hosting services. So if I decide to upload a video, that would make me a provider as well, and I would have to register. So it doesn't just necessarily fall under content creators, but it could also fall under hosting companies who may occasionally decide to upload something as well. So I don't like this terminology. I don't think this exclusion is written very well. And I think the government is just trying to prop up traditional media at the expense of everybody else. So now that we know what this act is about, who is it ultimately going to help? It's going to help traditional media quite a bit. Ultimately, who does this bill help? Well, it's going to help traditional media for sure by bailing them out continually. We know that traditional mainstream media is dying and is constantly being propped up by Canadian tax dollars. Mainstream media will always suck wind, in my opinion, to the ruling party in charge, which happens to be the Liberals right now, because they got their bailouts and their financial incentives. So as long as they're getting their financial incentives, they're going to basically suck up to the ruling party. Their objective reporting is going to be I'm going to say they don't even do objective reporting anymore. And they're always under the fear as well of being under the axe. So this bill is only going to make things worse for us, the viewer and the average Canadian, but it'll help out the mainstream media, which is obviously dying off. I also think that it helps the government as well, because now they can sort of get their fingers in on social media and start to control the narrative a little bit. If they decide they want to bury a story, they could just go to the CRTC and say, oh, well, this is not Canadian content enough, or make up some other excuse to allow the CRTC to make a request to the platform to say, hey, we don't want this content. We don't feel that it's up to Canadian values, let's say, and so bury it down at the bottom of the algorithm. And then obviously they might lose their budget as well. And if they lose their budget, they're probably going to lose their mandate, and it's just not good. All in all, I think this act will change the way Canadians produce and consume online content more and more. Canadians are moving away from traditional media because, well, simply put, they produce terrible content. That is not really objective, in my opinion. The act has already passed Parliament and has made it through second reading. And I believe the last committee that will do a vote, I don't even know if they have to do a vote, but the last committee to look at this is on November the 18th, I believe. The law is basically already in place. It's just formalities at this point, and then it'll get forwarded to the Governor General, who will then give royal assent to the bill. Now, it is unclear, however, how long the government and the CRTC is going to administer and enforce this new law, but they're obviously going to go after big tech giants first, and the smaller content producers will probably, it'll take a while for this to affect them, but it will affect Canadians as a whole as soon as the big tech giants start to roll out their changes. The interesting thing is there's an adage which still rings true today, but I'm going to put a modern spin on it that would go something like this. First, they came for the whistleblowers, and I did not speak because I was not a whistleblower. Then they came for the protesters, but I did not speak because I was not a protester. Then they came for independent media, and I did not speak because I was not independent media. And finally, they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So the question now is, what do we do about it? So it's too late to stop the bill via traditional means. Now, unless something insane happens in the upcoming committee meeting next week, or it gets stalled somehow in the committee meeting, it is going to become law. And once it becomes law, it will take a while to implement, as I had said. So there is some breathing room for us. But what do you do in the meantime? It is likely that the Conservatives are going to introduce a bill to try and repeal it. But if the other parties are not on board, it won't make a lick of difference. And the NDP are basically voting with the Liberals on almost everything. So I don't expect anything to change there. So the only thing left that we can possibly do is pressure the government, pressure the MPs, and spread this message far and wide. Even Elon Musk knew little about this bill until very recently, and I know YouTube has known about this for a while because I get ads about this very thing coming up. They're very against you. It's one thing that I agree with Google on, I suppose, that this bill is bad, but I guess a broken clock is right twice a day. Eventually, if we keep putting the pressure on, I think that we can slow down the process to a point where that it won't become law or become enforceable for a while until maybe another bill can get introduced that will defeat or repeal the changes. We can't sit idly by in our own lane at this point. The way you view and create content is going to drastically change. So thank you for listening to me in my little semi-rant about the government here. But try whatever you can do to raise up hornet's nest regarding this issue. I know there's still debates going on about this all over the internet, but it almost seems like a done deal. So if you can do anything at all whatsoever, just spread it around. If you get enough traction, then maybe it'll end up being repealed somehow. So thank you for listening and watching. I do appreciate it. Do like, subscribe, comment on this video, share it around. This message needs to get out. Thank you now, and take it easy. Take care. Signing out.